a human being starts to really get empowered with themselves when they start to make sense to themselves.
It doesn't matter who made the mess. Here's what matters. If you're going to live with it, you should clean it up.
Your past lives on in the kind of language you've used to capture it.
Need motivation?
Watch a Top 10 with Believe Nation.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like na 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 na. For my top 10, top 10, top 10, na 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 na. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Gary John Bishop, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Explore ways of being.
Can you talk a little bit more about ontology specifically, and what does that mean, the study of being?
Right. So one of my favorite philosophers is a guy called Martin Heidegger. He was a German existentialist from the early part of the 20th century. And he was an ontologist. The ontology was a big part of his field. So if you think of yourself, you're a human being, right? Now, most people online these days talk about their favorite human or my human, but you're missing the most important part, which is the being part, right? Because you're always being something, right? You're always being something. Being what? Being angry, being resentful, being compassionate, being understanding. Those are ways of being. What's a way of being? A way of being are certain predictable thoughts that you have, coupled with an emotional state. And then you throw in the mix of some behaviors. In general terms, that's a way that you be, right? Now, as a human being, you've actually got now, as an adult human being, you've got kind of very defined ways of being, very predictable and repetitive ways that you be in life. And when you were a kid, you had a lot more of those available to you. You would be lots of different ways when you were little. But as you've gotten older, as we've all gotten older, we're more like a certain thing. So
you have one way of being all the time.
Well, it's certainly within a very tight range, very kind of predictable sense of self. Mm-hmm. So in ontology, we not only take a look at, well, what was the pathway? How did you end up this way? Of all the ways that one could end up, we end up in a very distinct way. But then what am I missing out on? Like, what else is available to me? What if I could go into that situation and be courageous? And I'm never typically courageous, but man, what if I could be courageous there? That would be a way of being for you to explore. Like, what would life look like if you took it on from the aspect of courage?
Interesting.
Or what if I took life on from the aspect of love or understanding or compassion? So it allows you to kind of shift the context in which you participate in life.
Rule number 2, know your drive.
To what extent do you see that we're sort of creating our own reality, and how do we develop the wisdom to navigate that well?
Yeah. So there's a lot about that seems so unreal to us when you think I create my own reality, okay? Because, you reach out and you touch the table, right? It's not like you're imagining some holograph or something, right? But you are creating your own experience of being alive, and your actions are very much coming from your experiences. So when I talked about you're both the Matrix and you're the rebels, all of us, all human beings, are constantly setting up the game subconsciously. So you're setting up the game of relationships, you're setting up the game of finances, you're setting up the game of your body, and so you're kind of following predictable pathways. But you're also struggling with some of these things, right? Like, for instance, I'll give you a really simple example. If I'm somebody who's struggled with money, and I know that saving money is really good for me, why would I spend my last $100 at the mall? Like, why would I do that, right? Until you start to consider, well, maybe what I'm doing is I'm setting up the struggle. Maybe that's the game for me subconsciously. But if you take that same principle with your body, with your love life, with your career, see how you fundamentally relate to yourself is very deep, very profound. But you're so wrapped up in the surface issues of your life, you can't really see what's driving it all. Like, how come I turned out this way? If you set aside the kind of psychological explanations, how come I turned out this way? And where am I heading? Where's this going for me? How does this keep unfolding for me? And the surprising thing for a lot of people is, whatever you're struggling with today, until you finally understand what's driving it, you'll continue to wrestle with that until you die.
Rule number 3, be present in the moment.
We talked about love and how to have love in a relationship. And one of the complaints that I hear, or one of the issues that I hear in people's lives, is that they don't feel loved. They don't experience being loved. They're not loved. And they're then left with this kind of tail chasing exercise, okay? Where they're on the lookout to love themselves first. I first must love myself, which is that statement alone is very insular. It kind of turns you in the way, all right? So, which goes against the grain of love as an expression, right? So love is an expression, but I have to love myself first. It doesn't quite add up, and you got to check this out for yourself, okay? So, what we got to in my conversation with the client was that they themselves could see when they're being loved, that is, when someone in their life says, I love you, that they experienced love. And right away in the moment, it seems like I'm experiencing you giving me love. If you look again, if you actually inspect again, you'll see in the moment that they said, I love you, what you were actually present to was your own love for them. Now, if you again look in your life, you'll find there's occasions when people have said, I love you, and you didn't experience anything. In fact, for some of you, if you've had issues with certain people in your life and they say, I love you, you often experience resentment or upset, or, you might not always say it, but you'll experience it. That is, you can't experience that communication. You can't experience their love for you because you are not in the presence of your love for that person. Now, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that love is a generated phenomenon. That is, it's something I'm doing. It also tells me that love is not an outside-in phenomenon, but rather it's the other way around. It's inside out. That is, I have to be in the presence of my love for you to receive your love. So, I want you to try it out this week. I want you to try out for yourself being in the presence of, that is, getting yourself connected to your love for people, the people in your life. And especially in those moments when they say, I love you. I want you to be present to it, like be there in the moment with it.
Rule number 4, check your voices.
You're always talking to yourself about the same stuff, right? And you've got the same hooks and the same triggers and the same hang-ups and the same... you got to try on the idea that you're constantly listening for and looking for evidence that your subconscious view of everything is accurate. So in the background of your mind, it's these little triggers and, oh yeah, I need to remember to do that. And I have to, and I can't do that. Well, I'm not going to do this. And then she said, well, that's stupid. So the whole noise in the background is shaping a certain view of the world, if you like. So that noise, you have to start checking in on that. Like, what am I saying to myself? What is that based on? Why did I tell myself no there instead of yes there? To me, that growing sense of awareness of your own automatic, of your, as I call it, that little voice in your head.
Yeah.
The more you get,
which is usually not a really smart little voice. It's kind of like an idiot,
right? I mean, I would love to wake up in the morning and my little voice is like, "You're amazing."
Yeah, but it never does. No,
it doesn't. It goes, "Oh, here we go again."
Yeah,
it's the same noise in your head, but it's not. And it's not some kind of accident, that noise. It's designed to equip you to survive in a world. But the problem is you're surviving stuff that you just don't need to survive. You shouldn't survive your job. You're not supposed to survive your marriage. You're not supposed to survive your body. But we end up with these mechanisms that we're in this kind of internal war. And so, I want people to do the right kind of work on themselves in a way that makes sense to them and allows them to get insight into themselves to free themselves up. Because ultimately, that kind of introspection is really what starts you on your way.
Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, I've designed a special free training to help you do it. The science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action to build a new habit. And I want that for you. I want you to build the habit of self-belief. So what I'm going to do is email you every day for 254 days a link to an unlisted video that will shift your belief forward. To get on it for free, the link to join is in the description below.
One of the real reasons we don't do the things that frighten us is because we are afraid of being judged.
Today, what creates marketing is when you don't just market, but you add value to people.
If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about.
Rule number 5, seek self-awareness.
One of the interesting aspects of when people talk about awareness these days, what I feel as if they're mostly talking about is being aware of others. So they're talking about how others speak and others listen and others behave. And real awareness is actually starting to get aware of oneself. And I think if you ask most people, they'll say they are pretty aware. But, give me 10 minutes with them and they'll see how blind and deaf they've been. They aren't connected to their own wiring in many ways. Basically, I get people just to tell me about themselves, right? You'll hear and see the blind spots everywhere. They're all over their conversations. So when somebody talks, they're in fact speaking from the world that they're in. But people don't experience themselves as being in a world. We experience ourselves as being in the world. But you're not. You're in a very biased, a very kind of slanted, a very kind of weighted place in life. You're not interacting with life. You're interacting with you, interacting with life. And that's a very kind of nuanced thing. And when you start to point to some of those things with people, you start to say like, well, how come this is something that you get hooked by? Or how come this is a strength of yours, but also a weakness of yours? That's when people start to join the dots up for themselves. It's really not about telling people. It's really about asking the right kind of questions and engaging in the right kind of conversation with somebody that you'll watch them. You'll see people joining the dots up for themselves. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, that. And then, in my view, a human being starts to really get empowered with themselves when they start to make sense to themselves. Like your own actions, your own thoughts, your own emotional states. When all that starts to kind of logically click for you, to me, those are the beginnings of true awareness.
Rule number 6, confront your perspective.
Perspective is a word that gets thrown around a lot. Like, what is your perspective? It's such a thin word to deal with this really kind of voluminous thing. Your perspective is in everything you hear, everything you see, everything you say, everything you experience, every feeling, every emotion, all of it. That's your perspective. And it's hard to see it because you're in it. So you can't really witness it. So when I started to do work on myself, and it was in a specific area, actually. It was in my relationship with my parents, which at the time in my life I would have said was fine, right? It's okay, it's fine. But I never realized that fine was bullshit. I thought fine was just fine. No one had ever said, but why not amazing? And once I started to dig down in that, then I could see, well, because of this and because of that and because of this and because of that. And it was the first time in my life that I'd ever really confronted that was just a point of view. Like my entire past is only a perspective. It's not the actuality of my past. It's the past of the eyes and the ears of the person who was in it. But there was a lot of people in that past with their own eyes and ears, with a whole different takeaway from it than I had. But I lived like what I took away was now what is like the firm foundation under my feet. So I questioned everything. It was very unsettling at the beginning to actually question the narrative. And I'd never questioned the narrative, like truly questioned it, because I'd never seen it. Because to me, it was the truth. And that's the problem. People spend their adult life overcoming a truth that they made up.
Rule number 7, clean up the mess.
I was having a conversation with my 11-year-old son this week about cleaning his room. And it was kind of interesting because he said to me, I didn't make the mess. Why should I clean it up? And by the way, he was already walking over the top of things and around things like he was living with a mess. And I said to him, look, it doesn't matter who made the mess. What matters is you got to live with it. And if you got to live with it, then you should clean it up. Which got me thinking about you and your life and what you're dealing with. And here's what I'd like you to get. However you got to this point in life, whatever kind of past you had, whatever upbringing you had or lack of upbringing you had, whatever education you had or lack of education you had, whatever relationships worked or didn't work, here's what I want you to get. You can't keep looking back there as a way to explain the current mess. You have to deal with the mess that's right in front of your face, because it doesn't matter who made the mess. Here's what matters. If you're going to live with it, you should clean it up.
Rule number 8, mind your language.
How do I actually get free of something? Right. And so when we're in situations like, for instance, a dysfunctional marriage or a dysfunctional relationship, right? However you're framing that for yourself is how it will live on with you. So you don't get to say, oh, that was traumatic and I got da, and then free of that. You're now going to carry that around with whatever language you've used to hold it for yourself.
Right.
And that's true of all of us for all of our past. Your past lives on in the kind of language you've used to capture it. Mm-hmm. So it lives on in your thoughts and that selection of words and phrases that you've used to capture it for yourself. You have an emotional attachment to language. So that is, in the speaking of something, both to yourself and others, your emotions will rise and fall in the language you use, right? So for some people, they'll say, oh, this has been the worst day of my life. And it might not have been, right? It might have just been a tough day. But in the language, you'll have an emotional state, or as I just called it, a way of being that matches that language. So the first step I would say to somebody is you got to get really present to, really checked in with what's the language I'm using to talk about this, and is it empowering me? Not like, because sometimes people think, well, yeah, it makes me kind of, screw them. That's not power, right? That's more like kind of resentment. Power is when you can say, I've released myself from that. I'm no longer attached to that. That's power, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So then you really got to look at, well, what's the language I'm using and what's the language I could use, right? That would allow me to kind of put that in a better spot for myself such that I can move on. Now, it seems like sometimes people think this is just semantics, but absolutely your past lives on in the language you use to describe it. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's how it lives on in your life. So you got to be careful for two things. One, you might have been victimized, but it's incumbent upon you to make sure you don't become a victim, like a way of being.
Or continue to be.
Right. You got to, I might have been victimized about something. That's okay. But that does not diminish who I am as a human being.
Right.
Right. And at the same time, from that moment on, when you have those moments where you want to kind of look back or you want to just blame or you want to just be, because that won't serve you, by the way, in terms of fulfilling on a brilliant future for yourself. You can't keep looking back and they did and I should have and that. None of that will serve you, right? That'll just grind it on and grind it on and grind it on for you. But rather than starting to put it in perspective for yourself in a place that empowers you.
Rule number 9, get beyond the limits.
When you were born like this kind of potential, and you were a potential. Now you've become Lee Davey, right? Which ain't bad, right? I mean, that's a pretty good thing. But there's a limited range of potential in it. So there's a limited way that you can be. When you were a kid, that was unlimited.
Yeah.
You were free to be. The older you get, the more you notice the constraint of it. Like, you're more constrained to be the you that you've become. It's important to understand that, because your true potential, I'm saying this in quotes, lies outside of the ways that you currently be. You need to get beyond, like, the limits of your own persona, would be another way to say it. If you want to produce out of the box or out of the usual kind of results that you do in life.
And rule number 10, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is control the narrative.
A lot of what we're kind of hooked by as an adult is from whatever we took away from our childhood, right? So in my second book, I talked about this, like, what are the elements that you took away? What have you built your life upon? Of all the things that you could have taken, what did you take, right? And so when you question that with somebody and somebody says, you know, like, my mother was controlling, okay, which is a descriptive term of things you saw, okay? When I say my mother was controlling, that's not just a phrase. I'm knowing a world that exists now between her and I, right? And in this world that I'm in with her, it's not my perspective. I'm actually watching her do things that confirm what I've come to believe. I mean, I completely ignored all the other stuff, but I want to focus on this, right? Because this, to me, is the big deal. And so when I say to somebody, but what if your mom isn't controlling? And they say, well, she is. And I say, I know, but what if she's not? What if you just let go of the notion that she's controlling? Well, I'm not going to let go of that. Why? She's ruined my life. I say, no, you've ruined your own life. And then people start to fight for the narrative. Why? Because they've built the life upon it, and they've told other people about it, and they've got a consensus around them. And so they've filled their life with these people that are like, yeah, your mother's controlling. And you're like, yeah, that's right, she is. And then when I go into my relationship as an adult, this person's not going to control me. And even if that person is controlling me or not controlling me, I'm going to point to all the ways that I think they are. And then it's like I've married my mother. No, you're indulging your perspective. And you never get to see anyone beyond your own perspective. And that's very confronting for someone, because if you've spent 10, 20, 30, 40 years, there's a carnage. There might be divorces. There might be bankruptcies built on the illusion of control. And then it's like, then you start to see, like, I haven't been interacting with life. I've been interacting with my view of it, my judgment of it, my opinion of it. And that's sometimes really challenging for somebody's stomach.
Now I've got a special bonus clip that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? When you just get inspired, you watch a video, you get motivated, amazing. The science says you have a 35% chance of actually doing something, actually following through. That, Believe Nation, is not enough. That is not you, not now, not anymore, not today. But when you get inspired and then you create a specific plan of action for what you're gonna do, that number jumps to 91% chance of you following through. And when you commit publicly to others, like leaving a comment in this video, it jumps to 95%. So the question of the day is your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week. Put it down in the comments below, and maybe next week I'll profile you.
You have a choice, and it doesn't seem like we have a choice. There are things that happen in life that are not fair. There are things that happen that are, in fact, not right. But where you choose to kind of look at that from is ultimately how that thing will play out in your life. And I chose to look at my mom as somebody who didn't approve of me, didn't think I was good enough. I didn't realize until much later that, well, what if all of these criticisms were to keep me in line? What if all of these criticisms were designed for me to turn out in a way that she thought I could or perhaps should to make it in this life?
And it was then that I started to get that she raised me with the tools that she had, and that growing up, I criticized those myself. I was criticizing her, but then I started to kind of get a glimpse of who she is as a human being.
If you want 10 more amazing rules from Brendon Burchard, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Research study in psychology found out that both second person and third person makes you more, makes your self-talk more powerful. So if you're gonna do affirmations, you wouldn't just say, I wanna do this, I wanna do this. You wanna do what